Hello, everyone. My name is Stacey Burns, and I am a co-founder and the Chief Impact Officer for Colorado Institute for Social Impact. And today you are joining us for our introduction to social impact. So one of the things that we'll talk about today is really why is this sector showing up now? What is this social impact thing? And in order to talk about that, we really need to go back about 10 years ago and talk about where some changes in how people spend their money and how our economy works truly began. And so one of the biggest reasons that we see is back in 2008, you saw the crash of Wall Street. You saw a lot of folks losing jobs and a lot of folks needing supportive services. And you saw a lot less expendable income, a lot more families that really had to tighten their belt to get through the year. And so based on those needs, you saw folks that needed an extra level of service that hadn't engaged in services before. And so in pursuing those services, they would go to their local nonprofit for help with a utility bill or help in finding a job. And that nonprofit's funding oftentimes came from foundations. Well, foundations often have their money sitting on that same Wall Street that we did. And so when the stock market crashes, you see a potential thinning of funds for those safety net services. And that can be a challenge when our economy is in distress. When you have families tightening their belts, you have a lot of folks that still want to give back, but maybe they don't have the money that they would usually have had to contribute to their favorite nonprofit. They've started to look for other ways to support local needs in their communities. And as they found that they could buy a pair of socks and support someone in the local homeless shelter, or they could buy a t-shirt that they needed anyway and feed a family for a week, that this concept of getting a good or service that they needed anyway and being able to help at the same time really made a lot of sense. And you saw Wall Street start to experience some distrust from Main Street, and folks wanted to know where their dollars were going and that they weren't going to be lost because someone did not handle them well or responsibly. And so folks really started to turn in and look at how can they invest their dollars locally and make an impact in their own community that is meaningful and that they can see right before their eyes. So we're going to take a quick look at this Bombas video. I think this is one of the best representations of why social impact organizations can be so dynamic and meet such a basic need with such great flair. So let's take a look.
These are socks. This is a tattoo shop. This is Dave. Dave didn't want a tattoo. This is Dave getting a tattoo. Why is Dave getting a tattoo? 4 years ago, Dave worked for a media company. I worked there too. We became friends. We worked out together. We had lunch together. We talked about starting a business together, but it was just talk. Then one day, Dave saw a quote on Facebook that said socks are the #1 most requested clothing item in homeless shelters. Dave said to himself, why is that? Well, it turns out you can't donate used socks, for obvious reasons. And if you sleep on the street, you probably don't take your shoes off at night because you're afraid they're gonna get stolen. You might not own a car, you might not own a bike, so you're probably walking everywhere too. Your socks get worn out, and you don't have as many chances to wash your clothes. All that adds up to major foot issues. This is the world we live in, but we believe it doesn't have to be. We can do something about it. So we did. We quit our jobs and started a sock company. We named it Bombas after the Latin word for bumblebee. Bees live in a hive, they work together. They're small, but their combined actions have a big impact, which is why we made our mantra, be better. This is what we do. 1 pair purchased equals 1 pair donated. To donate a lot of socks, we knew we needed to sell a lot of socks. And to sell a lot of socks, we needed to make the best socks in the history of feet. We started with this, tore it apart and changed everything we didn't like. Socks shouldn't have an annoying seam, fixed. Socks shouldn't fall down, fixed. Socks should provide support where you need it most, fixed. It took 2 years to make our dream sock. We thought we had something special, but we didn't know if anyone else would think so, which is why Dave said, if we donate 1 million pairs of socks, I'll get a tattoo to celebrate. I said, I'll hold the camera. He said, deal, and we went about our business. But then something happened. People loved our socks. Here And here, they bought a lot, and we donated a lot. Our supporters became evangelists, not that kind, that kind. And instead of taking 10 years to donate 1 million pairs of socks, it took 2.5 years. 1 million pairs. 1 million in 2.5 years. That's over 1,000 pairs a day. It was hard to believe. It's surreal. So Dave got that tattoo, which means he can show it off at dinner parties and say things like, "I'm so smart and successful." Just kidding, he's not gonna do that. Because the reason someone who didn't want a tattoo got one isn't because of how we ran this business, it's because of you, what you've done. You made 1 million acts of human kindness happen. You cared about something small but important. You, the Hive, came together to make our world a better place. We can't thank you enough for that, and we'll never forget it.
I know, it's literally on my arm forever.
So the Bombas video, as the gentleman in the video, the co-founders talk about, they didn't start with just, we're going to make a sock like everybody else's sock. They really focused on the quality of their socks. They focused on how are they going to make it the best sock that someone's ever had. And they're going to give that same quality of sock to someone in a homeless shelter because they saw on the internet that that was the #1 most requested need. So this can be something that starts in your community as something that's been around for hundreds of years. And the disruption is that you're going to do a 1-for-1 model, or that you're going to change how you provide quality to that product in addition to making a social impact. And so I think Bombas represents that very, very well. So let's talk a little bit about this whole consumerism thing. And Cohn found that people across generations in the United States are actually changing where they will put their dollars. And so 88% would buy a product from that company if it has a social impact. 75% would try an entirely new product from the same company if it has a social impact. 66% of those would switch their product, and 57% would actually pay more for that product. And so for all of our business owners out there, that's some really great data of where consumers are trending and how they're going to spend their dollars. In terms of hiring, I think this is a really important statistic. So the millennial generation was expected to change jobs 20 times over the course of their careers. And so that's about every 2 years if you run an average 40-year career. And so Deloitte actually did a study in 2016 to find out where are the millennials staying and why are they staying longer than that 2-year span. And so what they found is the folks that lasted longer than 2 years and actually stayed 5 years or longer had a whole array of reasons that, if you look at the bottom of the slide, really had nothing to do with money. Now, we can assume that maybe they were at a comfort level with what they were earning that didn't involve money. But once you take that into consideration, you look at things like, did they receive mentoring? Did they feel valued? But the #1 thing that kept someone at a job, kept a millennial at a job, 88% of them, was that they felt a sense of purpose and that they were tied to that organization's reason for being, and that the organization was clear in what that purpose was and how they could connect with it. And then Conscious Company did a great study in 2018 and actually showed that in terms of growth for companies, 85% of purpose-led companies showed growth in their area, and 42% of the non-purpose-led companies actually shrank. So really interesting statistics starting to come out around who shops these companies, how consumers want to spend their money, where folks want to work, and then ultimately how those companies are doing on the market. So what is this thing called the fourth sector? So we've had 3 sectors of our economy for a very long time. We've had the public sector, which is our government. We've had the private sector, which is our for-profit sector, been around for hundreds of years. The plural sector, which is done differently in the United States. I think it's safe to say than it is in a lot of other places in the world. And that plural sector includes our nonprofits, our NGOs, and other parts of the world. It might be a co-op or something of that formation. And so Stanford renamed that the plural sector a few years ago, and it kind of led way for what is the next evolution, and that's where we get the fourth sector. And so in 2011, Hirad Sabeti talked about how the rise of this sector is likely to reshape the future of capitalism. Then you fast forward to 2018 and 2019, and you see the Mr. Larry Fink, who is the CEO of BlackRock and manages several $1 trillion in investments every year, that writes a letter every year to CEOs, specifically focused on Fortune 500 companies, letting them know what trends he's seeing in the market. And in 2018, the title of Mr. Fink's letter was A Sense of Purpose. And he doesn't typically write letters of the same topic 2 years in a row, but sure enough, again in 2019, the title of his letter was Purpose and Profit. And in these letters to CEOs, Mr. Fink is letting them know that this social impact, this responsibility to communities and our society is incredibly important, and that as businesses and both private and public organizations, we really, really need to have a commitment level to that, or you may not survive as an organization. So when I went to my guidance counselor in high school and said, hey, what are my options? I think a lot of us were given the choice of either working for a nonprofit, and we joke a little bit here because we all work for a nonprofit about taking a vow of poverty, and you are just completely excited about the work that you're doing, but maybe it's not the money that you're earning isn't representative of that skill set that you have sometimes. Or you could go work for a for-profit company and you could make a ton of money, but maybe you wouldn't feel fulfilled every day. And so trying to figure out which way you were going to go with that was a tough choice. And so at the Institute, we wanted to make sure that we were expanding on what those choices were, and our CEO, Jonathan Liebert, created this model so that we could talk about what this fourth sector looks like and how there's a whole continuum of choices that comes between for-profit and nonprofit now. So in this fourth sector, we don't care what your tax status is. It doesn't matter if you're a for-profit or a nonprofit. That is specific to your business model and what works best for you. But there are already a whole array of options that you can choose from in this sector. And there's bound to be more. There's so many in-betweens. So the first part of the sector on that far left side of the slide, next to nonprofit, is social enterprise. And so for social enterprise, this is a business that solves to exist a social issue. And we'll talk about some examples here on the next slide, but this is oftentimes a nonprofit, but it can also be a for-profit entity. You have a social business, which is a business that has both commercial and social goals woven into the fabric of it. We'll talk about an example there, but oftentimes the social business is not the entity that's doing the work. They are often doing a portion of what they make in a very different way from CSR. We'll talk about that as well, but a portion of what they make that's committed to going to solve that social issue. A social business can also be a nonprofit or a for-profit. Conscious capitalism, which has been around for around a decade, since John Mackey and Raj Sisodia wrote the book on it, literally. And that has been an evolution from companies really that started as Fortune 500s and are doing things differently. And we'll talk more in depth about that model here shortly as well. And those companies are only for-profit companies, as are the social impact legal entity for the time being, off to your far right there. And so the legal entities that are most common right now, 35 states and the District of Columbia have approved benefit corporations in some form. And the B Labs group has done a great job championing that and spreading that across the United States as an option for a legal entity. Several states have other options in addition or in lieu of that. So Oregon, Washington, Texas, California all have some other legal entities as well to be able to identify yourself as a social impact company and keep that as a core part of why you exist. So I promised some examples. Tom's is a great example of a social enterprise, and I think Tom's is a great example for so many reasons. They scaled so quickly and caught on so quickly and did a wonderful job of trying to meet that mission. And Blake Mycoskie did not get into making shoes because he wanted to be a shoe designer. Blake Mycoskie got into making shoes because he wanted to save children's lives because they were ingesting toxins in their feet without being able to afford shoes for themselves. And so when you look at why that company exists, when we talk about social enterprise, it wasn't to make shoes. It was to save kids. And now it's to save sight and to provide anti-bullying programs in high schools and to restore vision. They have a lot of great programs where they've diversified. Social business is Newman's Own. So I mentioned before that this company is not always doing the work themselves, but they are contributing a significant amount to changing a social issue. And Newman's Own is all profits to charity. So everything that's above the operating costs of that organization are going out to the organizations and the missions that they want to fund and that they feel passionate about. So a little bit different model, but still very different from corporate social responsibility. Corporate social responsibility often gets included in the marketing budget of a lot of organizations and can be susceptible to being in a different category than what's core to why that business exists. And so making sure that as a social business, this is part of why we do what we do, is to raise money for those organizations, as opposed to, if I have an extra $10,000, I'll sponsor your event or I'll provide this grant or whatever the case may be. This is really central to why the social business exists. So for conscious capitalism, we have Starbucks, and they are a great example in a lot of different ways. They were one of the first companies to sign on for hiring veterans coming out of our wars in the past 2 decades. They have done a lot for young people in that they provide free online tuition assistance for folks that want to get a degree from ASU. Remotely. They offer benefits for part-time workers, and they've even gone so far recently to pilot offering 40-hour employees or 40-hour-a-week employees that could spend 20 hours a week of their time out in the community and volunteering or engaging social mission organizations. And Starbucks has just really found that it helps their business model. It changes how people feel about them when they can see their employees in the community being excited about supporting local. And the employees are also excited about working for a company that cares about them and cares about the communities that they're in and isn't just a corporate giant. And then you've got the social impact legal entity. So back in 2012, Patagonia actually incorporated as a benefit corporation in California. And so Yvon Chouinard said that he did that for a couple of reasons. And so he did it to make sure that his legacy as he prepared to transition the company would be in place, and that Patagonia brand and that logo wouldn't be used to just throw on any old jacket, and make sure that that the environmental support and the responsibility that he felt very strongly about would be maintained. And that also lets his investors know that that is going to be a core part of what they're doing, that they're going to spend money on research and development, on developing organic cotton, or making sure that their reuse program tells people don't buy the new jacket, just fix your old one. And that may change the profits of the organization. Interestingly, it's actually grown them in the past several years that they've been doing that. But it's something that your investors may have a response to. And as a benefit corporation, Patagonia is somewhat protected from that because it's part of why they exist, is to be a socially responsible or environmentally responsible company. These are just some books that you might want to check out. We have a whole reading list on our website, so please look there as well. But Mission Inc. is a great example and has a great business plan section for social enterprise. Muhammad Yunus literally wrote the book on building a social business. And then John Mackey and Raj Sisodia for conscious capitalism. And the B Corp handbook, we talked about B Labs really being a force behind a lot of these benefit corporation legal statuses popping up in different states. And so if you want to know how they're doing what they're doing and how to become B Corp certified, that's a great book to check out as well. So I promised we'd talk a little bit more about conscious capitalism. And before conscious capitalism, there was this book called Firms of Endearment. And when Raj Sisodia got with some of his really smart friends and decided that they wanted to look at the stock performance of a group of companies that might be doing things a little bit differently from other Fortune 500 companies. And you can see along the bottom of your screen that there are several different examples that they used. Some of them were just US-based companies, some of them are international companies, but they wanted to look at some criteria that perhaps started with Jim Collins and Good to Great, but really took that to the next level in terms of what a conscious company might value. And so some of the characteristics they looked for in those firms of endearment were things like their employee compensation and benefits package was at a higher level than their peers and their competitors. They hire folks who are passionate about customers, and that comes through in how they engage the folks that they're selling their products or services to. They view suppliers as partners and not just folks to be taken advantage of or go for the lowest bid, whatever the case may be. I think my favorite thing about these 8 standards is that they believe their corporate culture is their greatest asset. And when you have companies that focus in on that, it can change the whole organization and how they see themselves and how you retain talent. So when they presented their data. It was a 15-year retrospective. And so in looking at the S&P 500 as a comparable, they also brought in Jim Collins' Good to Great companies. And then there was the international firms of endearment and the US firms of endearment. So we're going to focus on US firms of endearment instead of international for the purposes of this video. But when they looked at the first 3 years of this 15-year trajectory, the actual financial returns, so having nothing to do with the slide we just talked about and all of those great ways of looking at your company culture and who you hire and all of those things, this is strictly off of the stock performance. So S&P 500, 57% return. Good to Great companies, 222% return. So great place to put your money. And US firms of endearment, you had an 83% return. So better than S&P 500, Standard & Poor's holding strong, but firms of endearment came in over that, but not even close to where Good to Great is coming in. So let's keep moving forward. 5 years, you've got 61%, so S&P went up a little bit. Good to Great actually dropped a little bit, and your firms of endearment are holding strong. They've almost doubled in that 2-year period. And then you go to 10 years, and then you go to 15 years, and S&P 500, 108% return, 118% return on your money. That's fantastic. That's a solid investment. You look at the Good to Great companies, they've actually rebounded. So you're getting a 263% return on your investment. That's incredible. And then you get to the US firms of endearment, 1,681% return. And I have had the opportunity to meet Mr. Sisodia and am thoroughly impressed. I think he is a very intelligent man, but that's a number that a lot of people have trouble swallowing. And so my uncle was actually a vice president of Standard & Poor's, and I said, can you just read this book and make sure this actually makes sense? And so when I asked him about the 1,681%, he said that's a real number. So those stock portfolios didn't exist. You couldn't buy a Firms of Endearment stock portfolio at that point in time. But had you actually invested in those companies, that would have been your return. So without any other criteria being considered, this financial return starts to show some real power behind economic drivers of having a social impact or being a conscious business. So I love this slide. This is one of my favorite slides. I'm coming to you from Colorado Springs, and our region has some incredible social impact organizations that have started here, grown here, maybe even a few that have transferred here. But we always try to share this in all of our classes because the model that really makes this strongest is a good local support where your community understands where they can shop and how that can make a difference. So you've got the Men's Exchange, which is a local men's boutique that takes in donations of suits and slacks and blazers, things like that. There is nothing in that shop that is over $40. But when you shop there, once James gets to 9 suits, that 10th suit goes to suit a man in need for free. And so you've got this incredible model that is changing not only how our community dresses, but the folks that are coming out of situations like homelessness or incarceration and don't have access to something to show up to an interview or something to just feel better about themselves in their workday. But when you can suit someone in need that needed a suit for their job interview, or they needed a suit just for their daily work, and James has suited men that needed a suit for a funeral. And he would tell you that if he was strictly reliant on grants and certain types of restricted funding, that he wouldn't have been able to suit that family that needed that for their mother's funeral, unfortunately. And so when you have the flexibility of a business model that allows you to have that unrestricted funding and make decisions as an entrepreneur and a person who's socially conscious about what makes sense for your business, that's where this model can really become impactful. So we have lots of great examples on this slide, but I'm going to keep going. So why did we start the Institute? The Colorado Institute for Social Impact officially started, the name was formal in early 2017, and then we launched some of these classes in person here in our region that fall. And the reason that we started was my co-founder Jonathan and I, we had a lot of folks that were just interested in how to do this. We had a lot of folks that wanted to start a business, but they wanted to do more in the community. We had a lot of big businesses in our own backyard that are doing incredible things and didn't know how to tell their story. And so we got to have a lot of coffees and have a lot of conversations, and those coffees and conversations turned into a company. And so we have formulated our goals in terms of measuring the sector's impact. We want to make sure that we're providing social entrepreneurs with resources and training and things like that. But our biggest goal, and you can read the rest of them there, but our biggest goal is really to just create a community around this. We were the weird nonprofit at one point in terms of not understanding that there are communities around this and bringing those communities together. But until we organize, until we are all sitting at one table having these conversations, I think we lose opportunities for advocacy. We lose opportunities to get the word out to more consumers that they can shop this way and really help them understand that this is an important part of our economy as it grows and hopefully continues to diversify in terms of what's being offered. So because of our experience in this sector, the Institute does offer consultation services. We want to make sure that we have shared every lesson that we've learned, both the hard way and some really exciting opportunities that we've had with over 40 years combined experience, to make sure that if we can help someone else do that better or more quickly or more efficiently, that we're helping them do that. And so our greatest recommendation is that if you're looking for someone to help you with that social impact idea, it doesn't have to be us, but make sure that you really vet them. Make sure that you really find someone that understands what you're doing and knows how to help you in the best way possible. So the other things that we offer are education and training. We have these introductory courses. We have online courses now, which is very exciting. And we offer certifications. And just this year, actually in 2019 and 2020, we'll have a high school course, a community college course, and a professional course running in social impact strategies, which we're very excited about. So a little more information about those. The associate's degree is also local, but they are doing a great job, and we're the first community college that we're aware of in Colorado and perhaps even the United States that is looking for an actual degree or offering an actual degree in social impact, actually social innovation. And so that's been a great partnership. And if you have someone that's looking for that formal piece of paper to say that this is something they're passionate about, that's a great partnership that we've really enjoyed. Another offering is the professional certificate. So you can read all about that on our website. We try very hard to make sure that that is the most impactful 3 days you will spend, probably in the year, hopefully, but definitely that week. And we go through a lot of different scenarios. We work through a business model with you and then get you out to a lot of these favorite businesses that I showed a couple slides ago to make sure you get to talk to some other social entrepreneurs as well. And we do networking and events, and a lot of those are around whether it's our annual awards event, which is the Prism Awards, or it's just networking events. If you're watching this from somewhere outside our region, just know that creating a community around this can be really impactful. So maybe you can start an event where you are if you're not close by, but we'd love to have you if you are. And keep an eye out for our panels. A lot of those are live streamed or they'll be available as content along with these videos. So, and then our other offering is social return on investment. So I always joke is I'm the numbers geek of the group. So I love the idea of not only being able to measure that financial return on investment that Raj and all of those folks were able to look at, but look at that extra financial investment and make sure that if someone is creating resiliency, or what was the value of getting that person a job or getting that person health care. Oftentimes, I think we are looking at numbers that they're always just how they present. And social return on investment helps give you a deeper understanding of what the value and actually the dollar value of some of those intangibles are. And so just to take you through a really quick example, impact profiles is something that we developed because we needed a common language. So part of the Institute, what we want to help with is how do we create one language for all of these different nonprofit and for-profit types to be able to talk. And that could be funders, that can be businesses, that can be educational institutions, whatever the case may be. And so just very similar to risk profiles in your investment portfolio, we wanted to develop impact profiles that actually show you kind of what is the sureness that we're able to express the data and the dollars that I'm going to talk to you about here in a second. So the established SROI is basically, that's your conservative investment. That is your 100%. We know that this is the return, the social return on investment, the dollar value of what this organization is offering to the community. The probable SROI is still likely data, but maybe the resource that we used to tie a dollar value to that data was older than we would have liked, or maybe the data was not gathered as consistently as we would have liked. And so we don't want to make sure that we count that in the established, but we want it to be recognized. And then possible SROI is a very similar category, but and we do feel good about the data, but maybe we had to extrapolate US data when we would have rather have used local data. Or in some cases, maybe we're looking at a generational impact. And so I can't say for sure that me getting a GED is going to ensure that my daughter is going to get a GED, but there's some really great data that shows that that's very likely, and that the more models you have in your life that are achieving the goals that you would set for yourself, the more likely you are to achieve those. And so we start to look at things like generational impact in that possible category as well. So we'll go through an example really quick. And you are an investor, and you have an opportunity to invest in a company that is going to give out 500 Band-Aids, or you have an opportunity to invest in a company that is going to give out to 5 people 1 year of intensive health care. And that could be anything they need. So not low cost, right? There's going to be a lot of costs associated with getting anybody that they need medically, even just for 1 year and even just for 5 people. So decide which way you want to vote. But let's walk through the impact profiles of what that looks like, because a lot of times funders will see this and they'll think 500 is always better than 5. If I can serve more, or if I can impact more, that always has to be better, right? That has to be more impactful. And so let's deep dive into that a little bit. So for the 500, your established SROI is really strong. It may not be a lot of dollar signs, but you've got really strong data in that category because it's immediate. You can count the Band-Aids. You know that you helped 500 people. It's visible. There are things that really are solid about that type of data. When you look at the probable SROI, maybe there's some prevention aspects to that. Maybe it kept somebody out of the urgent care because the cut got infected that they put the Band-Aid over. And so that can be some major dollars for urgent care or even an emergency room visit. And so there's dollar signs associated with that prevention and that social return on investment. For the Band-Aids, there's not really a possible SROI. I don't think we changed anybody's life or their kid's life by providing them a Band-Aid. And then we look at the 5 and we look at the impact profiles. And so from the established SROI, maybe you intervened on an illness. Maybe you got to treat that earlier than if they hadn't had that care for a year. And there were some savings associated with what the level of care needed to be or how long the care went on. And so maybe there's some dollar signs associated with that. Maybe those 5 people look absolutely no different medically at the end of that year than they did when they started. So there is that. The probable SROI, maybe you prevented a certain level of illness. So if they were able to go in for genetic testing and a woman finds out that she has the breast cancer gene and she's able to take actions, take steps that also cost money, but to be able to intervene with that and prevent herself from getting breast cancer, the dollars associated with that, cancer is one of the top 3 most expensive conditions costing our country dollars right now. And if we're preventing that from happening, there's some significant cost savings in that prevention. The other thing that you can look at in that probable category is that maybe because they had access to healthcare, instead of that cough becoming pneumonia, they were going into their primary care to treat the cough and to get the antibiotic or to get the inhaler or to get a much lower cost of treatment than ending up in the ER with pneumonia and having a hospital stay and cases like that. So just being healthier in general over the course of that year, maybe they stayed in school or maybe they kept that job or were at work more often to be more productive. And that has some dollar signs attached to it as well. And then you get to the possible SROI. So maybe because they kept that job or they stayed in school, Maybe they earn more over their lifetime, and that starts to impact their families. And maybe when we get to that generational impact, maybe because those kiddos saw their parents being successful in school or at work, maybe they will be more successful in school and in work and have higher earnings over the course of their lifetime. So you start to see those dollars start to add up potentially as well. So at the end of the day, at the Institute, we're not trying to say that the 500 is better than the 5 or vice versa. All we want to do is make sure that through social return on investment, people have a measurement with which to understand what the breadth and depth of that impact is. And we found that dollars and cents is something that everybody understands, something we all trade in, and it can help both investors and foundations as funders come together and have similar conversations about how to make the most impact with their dollars. This is a great example. Bridge to Justice was one of our first social return on investment projects, and as we worked through with them, one of the most significant things that happened for them is they started out describing themselves as a nonprofit law firm. They were doing family court for individuals that met a certain financial threshold that couldn't afford a full-time lawyer or a full-price lawyer, but needed that representation. And so they were a nonprofit law firm. And when we sat down to meet with them, they started talking about how 40% of their cases are domestic violence. And that was the only statistic they had. But they knew that 40% of their cases involved some type of dispute. And so when we actually dug into the data, it was 39.9%. So they'd done a great job with their data representation. But the things that they hadn't looked at were what are the effects of domestic violence. And so when you start to look at the emergency services effects and the health effects and the behavioral health effects and the support services and DHS involvement and things like that, you start to get some really large price tags associated with all of those services. And so what we attributed to Bridge to Justice for having a sliver of a sliver of a sliver of that impact, because maybe the impact didn't stick, maybe the person is back in an abusive relationship, maybe the person is still going to need services, that those services are going to be ongoing, so they haven't cured the cost of what that domestic violence situation brought. And they weren't the only organization to get them out of that situation. They were the organization that drew a legal line in the sand, but they were not the organization that necessarily, there were probably several safe houses and friends and Department of Human Services workers that helped them move toward that decision. So after all of those discounting methods, they still ended up with over $1 million in social return on investment for domestic violence, which was a third of their total social return on investment. They now apply for funding as a public safety organization and as a health organization, in addition to being a legal organization. So it's changed how they view themselves, it's changed how they present themselves, and it's changed truly how they see what impact they're having. This is where we leave you with our purpose statement. At the Institute, we feel very strongly that we want to help move this sector forward in any way that we can. And if that helped you in some way today, we're so glad that you joined us. Please come back for more, and please come see us. We would love to have you. Take care.